Good morning, everybody. It is Sarah Willoughby from sarahwilloughby.com.au. This morning, I am with the beautiful Belinda Chapman, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Belinda's story about her journey to becoming a mum and all the amazing work that she is doing with women, supporting them with their infertility, and just helping them to be in the best place possible to hold a baby in their arms. So, welcome, Belinda.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so excited to be talking to you this morning.
I'm so excited because I actually don't know your story. So I'm just going to start by sharing your bio so people just get a bit of a feel about who you are. So, Belinda Chapman loves to support women whose womb space is messing with their headspace. I love that phrase, to stay cool and calm when their womb space flares up. She helps them to be free from the worry and anguish of their gynae conditions so that they can reconnect with their hopes and dreams and feel positive about their body, relationships, and life. They feel empowered to once again trust their intuition, assertively face their challenges with confidence, knowing that they are good enough and worthy of success. And I love that too, just that feeling of being enough, of being good enough, because we have so many messages, don't we, about not being enough. And
Yep.
when you're on that fertility journey, that's all you feel and hear. So I would love for you to start by just sharing your story and, where it all began for you.
Yeah, for sure. So I I think the first formal realization I had that it could be a tricky journey for me was when I was diagnosed with endometriosis in 2004. I had been over in the UK in the year before, and towards the end of the year, my periods, my cycles started to be quite heavy and painful again. I remember walking along the street with someone and just having to stop and being doubled over in pain and knowing that that was unusual. I had experienced period pain as a teenager in high school and had issues with my period then, but this is in the 1990s, and the doctors would be just like, oh, here's a day-long anti-inflammatory. It's pretty normal. And my mum had experienced it as well, and she'd had a nurse as a mum. And so it was just like this, oh, it's normal, just deal with it. Just take this painkiller.
Yes.
Sorry, that's not much more we can do. Thankfully, they didn't try and put me on the pill as a teenager. But they did when I was diagnosed with endometriosis. The timing of it was that, yes, I had a boyfriend. We were starting to become serious. But for me, I knew we weren't ready to try and start a family. I was only 26. We were still quite new in the relationship. But I almost tried to end the relationship because I was just like, the doctor was saying to me, endometriosis can make it difficult to grow a family. And I had always associated myself as becoming a mum. So I was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to drag someone else through this. It was such a mental turmoil to go through getting this diagnosis and trying to fathom what that actually meant and taking someone else through that. Thankfully, he was like, no, I'm sticking with you. We can handle this. So I went on the pill until we were ready to start a family. So that was 3 years. And in July 2007, so I was diagnosed with a formal laparoscopy, and I was diagnosed as stage 3 out of 4 endometriosis, had an appendectomy at the same time. It was that there was so much of it in my abdominal cavity. So in 2007, came off the pill. Yep, we're ready to start trying. He's like, all right, let's go in and do a laparoscopy and clean up anything that's grown. Not much had grown. And I had always been in the mindset of trying to be quite natural with my cycle. And so I was like, no, I want to let the pill get out of my system for a few months, which sort of went against with what the doctor was saying. He was like, oh, you have your best success when you're sort of flatlined with your hormones and everything's cleaned out. I was like, no, I want it out of my system. I want to do this naturally. I know my body can do this. And 2 years later, he was just like, look, you need IVF. And I was like, no, I don't need IVF. I can still do this. And we eventually conceded, like, okay, we need to do IVF. So I went to a different specialist because he was not my fertility specialist. He was like, had absolutely no bedside manner whatsoever. In the first round we did, we got no fertilized eggs. So that was just like a slap in the face. It was like, what? You mean that's even a possibility? I thought IVF was like this guarantee that, you do it, you get a baby. So that was a real shock. And so a couple of months later, we went back and we did an ICSI cycle, which is where they insert the sperm into the egg. We got a few embryos that she froze straight away because I almost hyperstimulated as well in that first cycle. So we knew I couldn't do fresh transfers. And then it was a year of failed transfers. It was horrible because we would do one transfer. And I remember that first transfer. So we did the pickup in around February 2010. And then we did the transfer at the end of March. And then we were traveling down on a road trip to a friend's wedding. And I remember being in a paddock in the middle of Mount Kosciuszko National Park, and going, out to the paddock to go to the bathroom and seeing spotting. And just like, it's that visceral, isn't it, when you have that result? And that memory stays with me, and just going, okay, well, that didn't work. That first transfer didn't work. And then having to go to this, this hens night with these girls that I didn't know, and this whole wedding on the back of this first failure of this first cycle. So then there were a few more. There were a couple of chemical pregnancies in there. And so I basically look back at 2010 as one of the toughest years of my life. Yeah. And towards the end of that year, and all at the same time as this was going on, I was a team leader in a science and engineering field. All the other team leaders around me were men, at least 10 years older than me, with their families. And I kept it to myself. I did have an IVF buddy at work. There was one other girl who got it, and we would share and we would talk things over. But otherwise, I was very much alone. And I just slowly pulled myself back further and further and further, because at the same time as this was going on, my two closest friends had their first babies. We'd gotten married in amongst all of that, and tried the whole travel overseas and, just relax, go on a holiday, it'd work. None of that worked for me. And so I eventually just sort of got to the point where I scaled back my work, and I was doing more exercise, and I was going to a women's yoga, and just really started to connect with my feminine side. So when we did our third egg pickup at the beginning of 2011, again, we froze them all. But by that point, I'd heard a little bit more about actually growing it out to blastocysts. So I said to her, well, when we defrost to transfer to, I want you to try and grow the rest out and see if we get blastocysts from them and refreeze them then. I don't want another year of multiple transfers of these embryos. I emotionally just can't take it. That emotional roller coaster of that 2-week wait was just killing me. In between the egg pickup and the transfer, I went on a yoga retreat, and I actually decided to take a few months off work. So when I was going to be doing the transfer was right at the start of taking 4 months off. I ran into a girlfriend of mine from work who had been off work for this few months. I had no idea why she was off work. We just got chatting when she got back, and she said, yeah, I actually took 6 months off to do IVF, and now I'm pregnant with twins. And I was like, oh, we need to talk. Like, I had no idea about her story. She had no idea about my story. And it was just suddenly this permission that it was okay to take that time for me and prioritize that process, because so much of the previous couple of years had been distracting myself, trying to do something else, to take my mind off, so I didn't have to deal with the pain. I didn't have to deal with the emotions. But when I finally stepped into that place of acknowledging my emotions and prioritizing my health and well-being, and sitting more in my feminine energy and caring more for myself, that's when we got our positive result. So that first transfer that we did after that yoga retreat, and when I'd taken that few months off, and I signed up to a painting course. And so on a Thursday afternoon, I'd go off and do a few hours of a painting course. So everyone thought I was just taking a sabbatical and doing a painting course. And that basically my first trimester I had at home. And then I went back for about 6 months and then went on maternity leave. So for me, during that first 3.5 years in that first round of IVF to conceive my daughter and birth my daughter, was really about that, honoring the feminine in me, and finally, you know, and stepping out of the pure scientist that I was, and being more feminine. And then when we went back, we sort of gave it about 6 months trying naturally before we went back and did IVF, and did that while I was still on maternity leave, did an egg pickup cycle. But I was like, okay, now let me just get settled back into work before I do a transfer. But unfortunately, there were a few more failed transfers in 2013. One of which was a chemical pregnancy, like just before we were about to go away, right at the end of the year. And I got a phone call. So we got a positive result on the Monday. I think it might have been, 50 something. So it wasn't the strongest result. And then I got a call on the Wednesday after the next result saying it had gone down and that it was a chemical pregnancy, and prepare for, this not to go anywhere. And that was my last day of work before we were going on holidays. And I bravely put on a brave face, went off to lunch with everyone, and then was catching up with a girlfriend on a Friday before we were going to go away. And I got a phone call from someone really close to me going, just, want to let you know that my boyfriend and I, we're 8 weeks pregnant. We've already done a couple of abortions. I didn't want to have another one. And I've just like sitting there listening to this, and kind of going, okay, this is off the back of, our last transfer, having turned into a chemical pregnancy. I remember hanging up the phone, sitting in my friend's house who I hadn't told any of the IVF journey to, because I needed those people that I didn't have to talk to IVF about.
Yes. Yeah.
I need it. And she'd never experienced it. So I wanted a relationship where I could just be a normal person. But I got off that phone and I broke down, and I swear she thought someone had died. I was that, inconsolable and just sobbing. She's like, are you okay? And so I had to tell her the whole story. And then we went on holidays with our, Nikki was 2 or 3, about to turn 3 at that point. And I saw pregnant bellies and toddlers everywhere.
As you do.
Oh my goodness, it was just torture.
Yeah.
The next year we decided to change specialists, and she did another laparoscopy. So that was my 5th by that point. She couldn't actually find any active endometriosis. So then I was declared unexplained infertility.
Okay.
Which was frustrating. But she did the process where she would try and grow out to blastocysts, and we didn't get any. So from my perspective of having had all these years of failed transfers with day-old embryos, to have my answer in a few days was such a relief. It obviously wasn't the answer we wanted, that we weren't going to go ahead with something, but the contrast from that multiple months and weeks of roller coaster to having an answer in a few days, I was like, okay, all right, I can move on from this so much faster with that answer. And just, I decided I needed a big break. I actually, at that point, I've had enough. I can't do any more. We're a 1-child family now. If it's going to happen, it'll happen. And I decided to try and start setting up a coaching and facilitation business in that sort of water science field that I was in at the time. And I started to get a few clients with that one. It started picking up. But in 2015, my menstrual cycle started going haywire again. I was lucky to have 8 to 10 days out of my cycle where I wasn't bleeding or spotting.
Okay.
And so by the end of the year, I went back to my fertility specialist, and I was like, oh my goodness, I've had enough. I'm pretty ready to end my cycle. But I know I won't forgive myself if I don't have one last try. And then throughout all of that, I was trying acupuncture, I was doing Bowen therapy, I was doing different modalities to try and work on my health, to bring my cycle back into check. But I was diagnosed with adenomyosis. So I had an MRI, and she said, oh, well, you've actually got adenomyosis as well. So she said, right, we're going to throw everything at it. And so I was shut down with Soladex for 3 months, which put me into an artificial menopause in the height of a Brisbane summer.
Oh, great.
Wow. It was just horrible. But from there, I think we did the scratch, we did the Pyador flush, we did human growth hormone. She was also going to try and do a fresh transfer. So she did this special trigger where I was shut down so I wouldn't be hyperstimulating, but triggered enough that the embryos, like the eggs, would release. And we did get a blastocyst. And in amongst that as well, I actually had this pure fear that I was pushing for this, that, you know, maybe we were only ever meant to be a one-child family, that if I was, you know, throwing all of this science at it, all of these medications at it, and forcing this to happen, that something bad was going to happen. I was going to, you know, have like a really abnormal, or something would really go wrong with the pregnancy or with the child. And so I went and had a past life regression. My acupuncturist does them as well. And it was so healing to go back to those past lives that had set in me this fear around birth and around pregnancy, that through that process I was able to let go of that and move forward. We ended up with a chemical pregnancy again from that one, which was devastating, of course. But I really had to, and the day of that result, it was really quite frustrating because I had an HCG of 4. So it wasn't even like, couldn't it have just been 0, you know, and it just been over with. But it was like, oh, it's 4, got to keep taking the progesterone pessaries. And I was like, no, I'm sorry, I'm done. Like that's to me, it hasn't worked. Let's move on. And I went to my kinesiologist that day, and we worked through accepting what will be, and accepting the unknown, because that limbo that you're in the 2-week wait, in each of those waiting stages, takes a real mindset shift to be in the what will be. And it's hard. And being okay with the unknown. Humans aren't very good at that.
We're not
at all. We don't like uncertainty. You know, the last couple of years of living in a pandemic has really highlighted how we're not so good at it. But I had to sit in it. I had to accept it, because there was no alternative. Like it was not going to be. And we had decided that was the very last IVF cycle that we were ever going to do. That was number 6. I was 38 at the time, which I know, like, it's not the end of the world. Like, it's still young enough that you will still produce viable eggs and embryos. But it had been it was 9.5 years already at that point, and I was pretty done. So in a way, by making that choice, and I say choice, it wasn't a giving up. We chose to stop. We had so much relief and so much freedom from ever having to go through that again, that we were almost partying. It was like, oh my gosh, we can just enjoy each other. We can enjoy sex. We can, just have us and be in our world again. And we actually conceived naturally that very next month. I would have still had human growth hormone in my system, and I still would have been like relatively shut down from having been through those few months of that Zoladex injection. So it was just this perfect environment where my body only had to produce 1 egg.
Yes.
I was relieved of IVF. And it was interesting. I think it was in 2015, I got to a mindset where I was just like, I don't even need another child at this point. I just want to know that my body can fall pregnant naturally. I just had this mindset that I just believed deep, deep down that my body was capable of doing it. Like, we hadn't used contraception since 2007 when we came off the pill, but we had never fallen pregnant naturally. And like anyone that's going through trying to conceive, you still try naturally, even if you're going through IVF, if it's an option. Obviously, yes, there are people who it's physically not an option for them. But for us, there was no reason why we couldn't fall pregnant naturally. There was no explained reason. So we did. So he was the miraculous conception from that perspective. Like, he's the only natural pregnancy we've ever had. Like, and as I said, we don't use contraception because I don't need it. And my daughter was a miracle because she was the only embryo out of all of those 6 IVF cycles that became a live baby, like a live birth. So it was quite incredible journey to have gone on. So for me, the lesson second time round was around that fear and letting go of that fear and accepting what will be and learning, practicing to learn to be okay in the unknown. And it was when I was about to finish maternity leave. So when I was on maternity leave with my son, it was actually my daughter's first year of prep. So it was beautiful to be home and help her get settled in to school. But then, going back to work, I was going to be going back to work 4 days a week and 2 different jobs. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to do my head in. So I went and did a parental stress center course called Tame Your Temper, because I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be trying to get us all out the door in time for me to be ready for work and daycare and school. I've got to work on myself here.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in meditation throughout that course on this particular Sunday morning in January of 2018. And the idea dropped in that I should work with people on their fertility journey, because I always knew I could do more with my coaching. So I was trained as a coach in 2010, and then did further studies in 2015, but thought I would use it in the professional space. But I just had more of this feeling that I needed to work in that personal space. And I was like, okay, well, that's where I can work, but I'm going to need more of the coaching. So over the next few months, I was like, okay, what's more powerful than coaching? And I chose hypnotherapy and neuro-linguistic programming. So I did about 9 months of study of that double diploma. And in May 2019, I set up my Be Kinder to Yourself therapies practice here in Brisbane and online. And have been working with people on their stress and anxiety since, in the fertility space, in the general well-being space. And it's quite, as you can appreciate, it's so rewarding.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's such a beautiful thing to be able to do for other people, isn't it? When you really understand that journey, you walked that path, and you can offer hope and inspiration to somebody else.
Yes.
And just hold space for them. Hold space for those emotions, those difficult emotions, and just give permission, when we give ourselves permission to feel what we feel without judgment.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It just really changes everything.
It does. And what I find is, I would do the meditations, I would do the fertility meditations when I was going through the process, but because there'd been so many times where my belief that this is the time that it's going to work hadn't come to fruition, I started to lose faith in my intuition. So by the time I was finally pregnant with Nikki, I had no faith whatsoever in my intuition. So when it came to the pregnancy and the birth, I handed myself over fully to the medical professionals. So, when you read out my bio and talking about reconnecting with that intuition and that ability to self-advocate, that for me is such a critical piece, because not only is it, going to help you through the fertility journey, but it's going to help through everything beyond that. Whether that's dealing with miscarriage, whether that's dealing with a difficult pregnancy, whether that's, dealing with your pregnancy carers, dealing with the birth and the labor process, that is a space for self-advocacy, because, it's your body, it's your baby. And that shifted hugely when I had my son, because I had let go of some of that fear, and I'd let go of some of that. I'd started to trust my intuition more, and I went with a private midwife, and I just interviewed her yesterday, and it's going to be up in my group next week. Highly recommend everyone tunes into that one, because October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month as well. So It's an important conversation around that self-advocacy. And so if you've lost trust in your intuition, that becomes even harder. And by working with someone one-on-one, you can rebuild that faith in themselves. And when working at that subconscious level, you're reminding them at that deep-seated level to have that faith and that belief in themselves that they can do it. And even what I find so interesting is I started to say, I'd be listening to these fertility meditations and they'd be guiding through a visualization of, watching your belly grow and then holding a baby. I couldn't do them. They felt too dangerous. They felt too scary. They felt too painful for me. But I can do that now in my practice because I've held space for these women to build up rebuild their intuition and their faith in themselves, and get them into such a pure state of relaxation that conscious mind, that analytical, oh, this is too dangerous, don't go there, mind is off. It's completely offline. And they can safely go there and just experience the pure joy of dreaming about this, of visualizing something that they so desperately, because we all, we know that that's the truth, want, deep in our hearts. It's this biological drive that you can't deny.
It is. And I think the journey that you've been on and the journey that so many other women go on are just testaments of that. The things that we will put ourselves through, the things that we will experience, because that biological urge is just so very strong.
God, you can't rationalize it with it.
No, you can't.
I tried.
You look back at it and you go, I did what? For how long? But yeah, and you're so right. We have all the answers deep inside, and that was something that I learned on my journey. My journey became a journey to self-love, a journey to acceptance, a healing journey. And I got to a point where I had nothing else left to lose. So I was ready to face my fears and begin a new life. And that was when I naturally fell pregnant. So we have a lot of similarities in our stories, but also the work that I do now around mindset, and I'm sure the work that you do, understanding Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, that our bodies don't know the difference between the past, the present, and the future. So we can get into that space of really, truly feeling what it's like to have a baby, hold that baby in our arms, really, truly believe that this is for us. It can be scary, but once we've worked through that, it can be so empowering.
Yeah.
Because then we're back in charge of ourselves and our body, and there's decisions that we make for ourselves moving forward.
Yeah. And then the key with that though is to then let it go, not obsess.
Yes.
That, I've experienced now it's a rally, it's going to happen now, and this is the cycle it's going to happen in. It's that obsession and that gripping onto it.
Yes.
There was a really cool analogy that a business coach taught us a little while ago. If you're holding on to something so tight, there's no space for anything else to get in.
Yeah.
But if you hold it in this way, it's there. There's all this space around it for everything that needs to happen to allow it. So I love that analogy of, if when you grip onto something, you're not letting it free to actually happen, and as well.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. And also what I've heard too is, when we hold on so tightly and when we don't know how to let go and let be, sort of thing, is we're sending out a message to the universe that we don't trust, that we don't trust the universe to meet us halfway and deliver. So there's that aspect of it too. But it is challenging, and it is something that you can't really understand until you've experienced it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But just knowing that it's possible, I think, provides that hope.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And the other piece that I've learned probably since is that if it depends on your spiritual beliefs, but we're not the only factor. Like, the mum to be is not the only soul involved in this journey. There's the soul contract that the dad has. There's the soul contract of that future spirit child. And if anyone comes across a book called Spirit Babies, highly recommend they read it. It's this beautiful book he's a clairvoyant, and he sort of stumbled into being able to communicate with spirit babies. So he would have these couples come in, and he would be able to tap in as to whether there was a spirit baby waiting for them or not. And, you know, when that spirit baby was likely to come in and what needed to happen with the mum or the dad to allow that to happen. Or, you know, the parents would be kind of like, oh, I don't know if we're going to. And he'd be like, well, there's a spirit baby waiting there for you, you know. And they'd be like, oh, okay, all right. Okay, now we need to sort ourselves out and welcome it in, kind of thing. When I was doing my Reiki level 2 attunement, my Reiki master, she said, oh, I've got something to share if you're open to it. And I was like, yeah, what's that? And she said, the message came through that your children actually needed you to fight for them. And I was,
of course,
validated.
yeah,
At the time, but you know, this is that difference between things happening to us and the things happening for us. So all of these pieces have come together for me to now own my story and know that every single part of it, every single piece along the way was meant to happen that way. You know, it felt pretty horrible at the time. And I think that translating it into why is this happening for me in the moment, I can appreciate is hard. I'm not going to pretend that you can just go, oh, yes, no, this is happening because of blah, 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 and be all spiritual about it, because you feel like crap at the time.
Yeah, we're human with emotions.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, the more you try and push it down and be all, you know, or, you know, positive about it and not acknowledge the real feelings that you're feeling, the worse you're going to feel. So you feel the reality, do the big ugly cries, wallow in that pain to let it pass. But I promise you that you will come to a point where you'll realize why it's happened for you, and what you can learn from it, and how you can use those lessons and the practices that you develop along the way to you know, become the person that you're meant to be.
Absolutely. I completely concur with that. As hard as my journey was, I would absolutely put all of those pieces back in exactly the same place, because it's got me to where I am now, doing, you know, the work that I love, helping so many people around the world like you are. And if I can help just one person,
Yeah,
then it actually makes my journey worthwhile, you know, beyond my children being my biggest blessings and my greatest teachers.
yeah.
So you touched on briefly about, you know, when you finally let go and you opened up to your friend and you were crying. And I think for me, when I was on my journey, I didn't recognize the level of grief that I was experiencing. So talk to me a little bit about grief and how that sort of fits into it, because I don't think we acknowledge it. We don't even necessarily realize that that's what's happening.
Yeah, I know. And this is it, because our society defines grief as someone died. And so that's when you're allowed to feel grief. That's when you have permission to feel grief. But along the way, along the trying to conceive journey, you're grieving the loss of the identity that you thought you were going to be a mother. Like, I thought I was going to be a mum at 30. I didn't become a mother until I was 34, or just about to turn 34. And I know that's relatively short in comparison to some women, but I still grieve that. That was valid for me to be grieving the fact that it didn't happen. I was at my wedding with my two best friends, who were both about 8-9 weeks pregnant, and we'd already been trying for, you know, 9 or so months. No, it would have been about 12 months by that point, with no success. And I couldn't even go to one of my friends. I think it was either the first birthday or the baby shower, because the grief of me not being in that place as well with her was too much. It was too painful. And so that grief is very real, and it's you know, we go through all phases of that. The anger, oh my goodness, the anger phase that I went through, it, you know, my sister and I didn't talk for a while because I was in anger while I was also trying to plan a wedding. And I'd also put my hand up to be president of some industry association is what I'm talking about, the distraction thing. Oh my God, the things you do to yourself. So it was very real for me, that grief of each loss of each. And I remember, oh my goodness, I was going to this acupuncture clinic whilst I was in that 2010 year of failed transfers, and one of the chemical pregnancies. So we'd got the positive result on the Friday, and I had an acupuncture appointment booked in for the Monday, but I must have messaged him, or he'd found out that I'd got a positive result on the Friday. But in the meantime, during the day on the Monday, the levels had gone down again. So it was a chemical pregnancy. But he's there on the Monday afternoon, and he greets me with a bunch of flowers and a big smile and congratulations. And I was just like, and so I think I was the first person that he'd ever encountered, because he was relatively new, like it was his parents' practice. And so I was teaching him that, sorry, no, there's a thing called chemical pregnancies. Just because you get a positive result doesn't mean it's a guarantee. Poor guy, like, having to then stumble his way through my grief in that session that afternoon. So yeah, there are various different points along the way. You're going to have different types of grief. Really, you might feel valid grief around the actual, a pregnancy didn't work, or, there were no blastocysts that grow. But it's that loss of the grief of the identity, that you thought you were going to be a mum, or the grief of not being able to plan because you don't know what's happening. You don't know when there's going to be a transfer. You don't know when you need to do a cycle. You don't know whether if you're going to be pregnant or not. What were the kind of, yourself, like what were the kind of grief things that you grieved along the way as well?
I didn't, as I said, I didn't recognize that it was grief at the time, because I didn't feel it was valid grief, because so many people dismissed my miscarriages as, at least, we've just done the at least hashtag recently. And for me, it was the grief of this life that I had planned out in my head. I'd wanted to have 4 children very close together in age so I could go back to my corporate career, and life just didn't happen like that. It was the grief of not being able to give my son a brother or sister that he so desperately wanted, the grief of not being able to give my husband another child that he so desperately wanted, the grief of feeling like I wasn't enough, like we spoke about at the beginning, of the grief of feeling like my body was just constantly failing me and there was nothing that I could do to change that, or so I perceived at the time. The grief of going through IVF, and then that IVF going disastrously wrong and nearly losing my life, and knowing that I could never go through IVF ever again because it would kill me. So the grief of knowing that all our options had run out. And there was only one person in my whole journey that actually really helped me to acknowledge that my miscarriage, at that point was a baby to me. And that's when I had my funeral service. She actually, the chaplain of the hospital, put on, a proper funeral service for me and my husband and my son. And I have such gratitude to her for that. And that is something that I would encourage people to do, is to really honor the losses along the way, and do something that really helps you to let your emotions out and to acknowledge where you're at. So grief, I don't think I fully, even just writing my book, I grieved as I wrote my book, because I went back into it and realized that I hadn't grieved properly. So I was still grieving even until fairly recently. And I'm sure I still will. I mean, 15th of October, I light 3 candles with my children every year, and we grieve for the babies that didn't make it. That's another time, and I love that because it involves my children in that process. But as you say, no matter what happens, whether you conceive, you don't conceive, you have a miscarriage, you don't, there's a lot of grief, around people not understanding how to support you, not knowing what to say, not feeling seen and heard and validated. So
well, that's it. Like, I was saying before how much I pull back from society. That's such a common coping mechanism for people going through infertility and IVF, because it's just too hard to be constantly asked. So when are you having kids?
Yes.
When are you having the next one? Oh, don't leave it too long, and I couldn't wear loose tops because I was scared of people looking at me and thinking that I was pregnant when I knew that I wasn't. And that was too hard for people to think I was pregnant when I wasn't. I didn't even want to hold babies. So babies would come to me and they'd scream. And so I'd feel even worse, be like, oh, maybe I'm not meant to have children because babies would scream when I'm in my arms, because I was so tense about people saying, oh, you're getting clucky, when are you having kids? But because it was too painful. So it was grieving just being normal and just being able to enjoy being social. And, as a 30-something-year-old woman married, the expectation is that you have children now. Come on, where are they? So grieving, not meeting those social expectations. So it's tricky. Like, it's a minefield, definitely.
Yeah. And putting your life on hold, you mentioned that about putting your life on hold. I look back and I go, oh, there's so many holidays that I didn't go on because I might be pregnant. And I look back at that and think, I wish I hadn't done that.
Yeah.
And not saying no enough to social engagements where I knew that actually it was going to be too hard, but I wanted to be able to be there for my friends, family. And so you put yourself in situations that actually are not helpful to you, detrimental to your own mental health and well-being. So I really encourage people to listen to themselves and put themselves first wherever they can.
Yeah. And there are so many beautiful Facebook communities now where I'm seeing women reaching out and creating these social connections with people who get it. I really believe that having those IVF buddies, is what I called them when I was going through it, was just so empowering for me to know that all the feelings that I was feeling were completely valid. They were normal in that context. So yeah, it's really, really helpful. I remember that same girlfriend that I was talking about who took the 6 months off. She was, at the time, this is back in 2010, there were a lot of online forums. I wasn't mentally strong enough to join them because I was scared of people falling pregnant before me.
Yes, yeah.
So that was the only sort of caveat I had around it. I needed to just be with people who I felt safe sharing with. But this is where our work is so important, to build people's mental health and their strength up, that they can be in those environments, reach out to support. Even if those people do fall pregnant before them, they can feel happy for them, but sad for themselves at the same time, without it feeling like crushingly devastating.
Absolutely. So talk to me about the work that you do with women, how people can work with you, what you offer, because your work is so needed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, as I said, I love to work with women. I've expanded out beyond the pure fertility because I've come to realize just how much our health impacts on our mental health. So having experienced endometriosis and adenomyosis myself, and now coming into perimenopause, I appreciate just how much, when we're not in balance, impacts on our mental health. So I work not only on that fertility, but on those, as I said, when the womb space is messing with the head space, kind of contexts. And as I was saying, it's really about clearing away any of those blocks to that happiness. So whether there's a compounding of stress that women have had built up over time that has left them in a state where they're reacting to any trigger left, right, and center. They're more emotional than they want to be. They're foggy. They have no clear memory. They're not thinking straight, or they just have no clarity about who they want to be and where they want to be. Really helping them to get really crisp and clear. So the coaching helps them talk that through and get that clarity. The hypnotherapy and NLP resets those patterns, those neurological patterns, those behaviors, so that, everything that we do has a positive intention, but it may not be acting out in a helpful way. So it's going in and going, okay, well, that behavior has this positive intention. but let's work out another way that we can enact that that's actually helpful for you, but still meets that self-preservation or that management or that fear or that need to be in control, because that's a big factor when we're going through infertility. A lot of women who they're used to being successful, you know, they're the type A personalities, they've achieved a lot in their lives, and then crash, oh my goodness, I can't even achieve and succeed in what's supposed to be the most natural, fundamental thing for women's bodies to be able to do. And so there's this real disconnect from the body. There's this real hatred of the body and distrust of the body. So it's rekindling that relationship. It's reconnecting with the body and like building that trust up with the body again. So working with those belief systems and shifting out of negative mindsets into a more positive mindset.
So important and so life-changing. Like if we can do this work now, that's when life can really unfold with more ease and grace.
Definitely. Like we both said, you know, everything in our journey has had an impact on today. And one of those is my resilience. You know, my resilience built up so much from what I went through and how I learned to pick myself back up and keep coping and keep dealing. But I never went alone. Like I was reaching out to help and support the whole time, whether that was acupuncture, kinesiologists, hypnotherapy, always doing something to support me in my body and my mental health along the way, yoga. So that's the role that I now play is in that space, to hold space for these women to meet whatever their desired outcome is.
Absolutely. Beautiful. So I believe that you have a free gift for our audience.
Yes, I have a PDF, 7 steps to enjoying life while trying to conceive. So it's a PDF with those 7 steps in there. And then there's follow-up emails as well that build on each of those concepts with more unpacking of what that could mean for you and techniques to support through that as well. So I would love that if anyone would like that PDF to send me a message, and I can send you where you can sign up for that, or I can even put the link in the comments of where you're posting this. So
I'll certainly put all the links in there. So if you can just share how people can connect with you, I'll also put those in the comments. But
yeah, for sure, definitely. So Be Kinder Therapies is bekindertherapies.com.au is my website, and there's a booking link there. And I always offer a 20-minute clarity call for people as well. I think when we're reaching out to a therapist, we need to know that we've got a connection with them. So knowing how important that is, investing in a therapist, I offer that 20-minute clarity call for people to kind of suss me out and make sure they've got that connection with me, and also to just get a feeling of, you know, what are their current challenges and how I might be able to help them with that. And if that's something that they feel connected to and feel resonates with them. So I'll definitely put the link in for them to book that 20-minute clarity call as well, to have that chat with me. That's just a 20-minute Zoom call, get to see me in person, connect in person or in person online, but get a bit of a better idea of who I am through that as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so important. And have you got any final words of wisdom? Just anything that you want to leave women with, a message for them, anybody who's going through that really challenging fertility journey?
I think, as we've been saying, you know, that ability to trust the body and reconnect with the body is such a beautiful thing to do. You know, when I was in that sort of science space, everything was up here. It was logical, it was rational, or if it wasn't, it was too hard to deal with. When we come down into the body, we're more likely to be able to process what's going on in a way that allows us to move through it faster. And we can connect to the wisdom of the heart and the gut. And even, I've done this with clients, connect with the wisdom of the womb as well. She has some beautiful messages to share. So when we can connect with that and tap into that, we can learn so much that is going to help us to be more focused and have that clarity around who we want to be and how we want to be along this journey. So anything that's going to help you to get into your body, whether that is hypnotherapy, maybe it's yoga therapy, whatever that is for you, that allows you to go below the neck and connect with your body, that wisdom within the body, I highly recommend it.
Beautiful. Well, Belinda, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to hear your story and hear about all the amazing work that you are doing. It is so needed in this world, and I just want to say thank you. It really is appreciated.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and for all the work that you do as well, and for inviting me in. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, we've been there. We know how critical it is to have the support of someone who gets it. So thank you as well.
Absolutely. We'll take care and we'll speak soon.